The night Margot Solis got fired, she was still holding a tray of champagne flutes. Not empty ones, full ones. The good stuff, the kind the Hargrove Hotel only brought out for galas and anniversaries and whatever wealthy occasion required people in floor-length gowns to stand around pretending they weren't bored. The bubbles were still rising when her manager, a thin-lipped man named Patrick, pulled her aside near the service corridor and told her she was done. "Effective immediately," he said, straightening his lapel pin like the conversation was already over. Margot stood there. The tray didn't shake. That was the thing she'd think about later. How steady her hands were, even as her whole world tilted sideways. She'd been a banquet server at the Hargrove for 4 years. 4 years of double shifts and sore feet and learning exactly how much eye contact wealthy guests wanted. Answer: just enough to feel seen, never enough to feel observed. She knew the rhythm of that place better than she knew anything else. She could carry 6 entrees without a second thought and remember a table of 12's drink orders without writing them down and smile. Genuinely, warmly, at guests who spoke to her like she was part of the furniture. She was good at her job, everyone knew it, Patrick knew it, which is why it stung so specifically when he said, "We've received a complaint about your conduct this evening." The complaint came from a man named Roland Vance. Margot knew exactly who he was. She'd served his table twice that evening, a party of 10 celebrating some kind of corporate merger. He was the kind of man who wore his money like armor, who smiled with his mouth but watched with cold, assessing eyes. At one point, when she'd leaned across to collect an empty glass, he'd said something low and private that she hadn't acknowledged. She'd just straightened up, smiled at the table generally, and moved on. That was apparently the conduct in question. "He said you were rude to him," Patrick told her. "He's a preferred member. He books 12 events a year through us." Margot opened her mouth, then closed it. There are moments in life when you understand, fully and completely, that the truth doesn't matter as much as the math. Roland Vance was 12 events a year. Margot was a banquet server who rented a 1-bedroom apartment she shared with a rotating cast of houseplants and a cat named Button who had strong opinions about everything. The math was not in her favor. She handed Patrick the tray of champagne flutes very carefully so nothing would spill, clocked out, and walked out into the November cold with her coat half-buttoned and her throat tight. She didn't cry until she was in her car. Then she cried for about 7 minutes, which felt like both forever and not nearly long enough. The next few weeks were the particular kind of hard that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. She applied for jobs. She got callbacks. She went to interviews and smiled and talked about her experience and her reliability and her ability to stay calm under pressure, which felt like a joke she couldn't explain to anyone. She picked up 2 shifts at a diner across town just to keep the lights on, work that was honest and unglamorous, and left her feet aching in a way that was different from the Hargrove aching. More grinding, less polished. She was fine. She kept telling herself she was fine. Her best friend, a ceramics teacher named Daphne, told her she was allowed to not be fine. "You got fired for telling a man no," Daphne said over takeout Thai one Thursday. "That's not a thing you just shake off." "I didn't even really tell him no," Margot said. "I just didn't respond." Which is the same thing, and he knew it, and that's why he did it. Daphne pointed a fork at her. "Stop being reasonable about unreasonable things." Margot stole a dumpling and didn't argue. She applied to a boutique event venue called Whitmore & Co. It was smaller than the Hargrove, maybe a third of the capacity, but it had a reputation for a different kind of event. Intimate dinners, private corporate retreats, the occasional charity function where the guests actually seemed to care about the cause. The pay was similar, the hours were better. And crucially, it was nowhere near Roland Vance's usual circuit. She didn't get her hopes up, she'd learned not to. Then she got the job. Her first week at Whitmore & Co., she mostly stayed quiet and learned the geography of the place. Where the supplies were, which tables had slightly uneven legs, which of the kitchen staff would slip you a piece of bread if you hadn't had time for lunch. Standard new job cartography. The event coordinator, a warm and efficient woman named Sandra Hu, walked her through everything with a patience that Margot found almost disorienting after years of the Hargrove sink-or-swim approach. "We're small," Sandra said, "which means everyone's visible. The work you do actually shows. That can be pressure or it can be motivation. Most people, it starts as pressure and becomes motivation. Give it a few weeks." Margot liked her immediately. It was during her 3rd week that the private dinner happened. A Tuesday evening, smaller booking, a table of 6. She was assigned alongside one other server, a college student named Theo who moved fast and talked faster. The reservation was under the name Ashby Holdings, which told her nothing because corporate names rarely did. She was refilling a water glass when she first noticed the man at the head of the table. He was maybe mid-30s, dark-haired, with a kind of careful stillness that made him seem like he was listening to everything at once. He sat in a wheelchair, a sleek, lightweight one that he navigated with the ease of someone who'd long since stopped thinking about it. He was dressed simply for a corporate dinner, no tie, jacket that probably cost more than Margot's monthly rent. He was talking to the woman beside him, a lawyer type from the look of the binder she'd placed beside her bread plate, and whatever he was saying was making her laugh. He had an easy laugh himself. Margot noticed that. Low and genuine, not performed. She refilled the water glass and moved on. Sometime around the second course, she was at the service station near the far wall when she heard the tone shift. Not loudly, it was a discreet establishment, but she'd been reading the acoustics of dinner parties for years, and the frequency change was unmistakable. A woman at the table, seated across from the man in the wheelchair, was speaking in a careful, surgical voice. She was beautiful in a way that seemed intentional. Every element of her appearance selected and maintained. Her name, Margot would learn later, was Courtney Aldwell, and she was the kind of person who could deliver cruelty with enough gloss that you almost doubted what you'd heard. I just think, Courtney was saying with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes, that certain expectations are worth being honest about, early on. The man, whose name Margot didn't know yet, said very evenly, "Is that what this is, honesty? I'm just saying, I'm a very active person. Travel, hiking, social obligations. The lifestyle I lead is very," she paused, choosing the word like selecting cutlery, demanding. The table had gone quiet. The lawyer with the binder was looking at her bread plate. The two men across from her had both found something fascinating to study in the middle distance. "I see," the man said. "It's nothing personal." "Of course not," he said, and his voice was so level it was almost frightening. "It never is." Margot was not supposed to approach the table. The second course was served. There was no operational reason for her to go over. Theo was already near the kitchen. She could circle back the long way, and in every professional context she'd ever known, you did not insert yourself into a personal moment at a guest's table. She went over anyway. She picked up an empty bread basket as a pretext and addressed the table with her ordinary professional warmth, the kind that was real but also served as a kind of shelter. A redirection, an interruption, a small act of merciful noise. "Can I bring anything else out while you wait for the third course? We have a rosemary focaccia this evening, if anyone would like some." The man looked at her, just briefly. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read, not gratitude exactly, not relief, something quieter and more complicated than either. "That would be great," he said. "Thank you." Courtney Aldwell set down her wine glass. Margot smiled at the table, collected the basket, and went back to the kitchen. "You okay?" Theo asked, handing her the focaccia. "Fine," she said. "Why? You have that look." "What look?" "The one you get when you're annoyed but being professional about it." She hadn't realized she had a look. She'd been there 3 weeks. "I'm fine," she said, and carried the focaccia back out. The dinner ended without incident. The group dispersed in the usual way. Jackets collected, pleasantries exchanged in the lobby, the small rituals of wrapping up an evening. Margot was clearing the table when she heard footsteps behind her, unhurried. "Excuse me." She turned. It was the man from the head of the table. Up close, he was less of a silhouette. She could see a small scar above his left eyebrow and the particular tiredness around his eyes that came not from lack of sleep but from a long day of being composed. "I just wanted to say," he started, then seemed to recalibrate. "The focaccia was a good call." Margot smiled. "It usually is. I'm Nathan," he said. "Nathan Ashby." She recognized the name then. Ashby Holdings. She'd seen it in business coverage once, tech infrastructure, something quiet and enormous. "Margot Solis," she said. "I know that was awkward earlier," he said. "I appreciate the redirect. It's part of the job," she said, which was only half true. He nodded. "Well, thank you." He paused. "The focaccia really was good." She laughed, a real one, slightly surprised out of her. "I'll pass that along to the kitchen." He smiled at that. It was the same easy, unhurried smile she'd noticed earlier, and it had the same quality. Unperformed, unpressured. He said goodnight and left. Margot finished clearing the table and then stood for a moment looking at nothing in particular. She told herself that was that. Nathan Ashby booked another private dinner at Whitmore & Co. 2 weeks later, and then another one the week after. She would learn later that he lived nearby, that he preferred smaller venues for the same reason most people preferred small restaurants to large ones. The noise was manageable and the anonymity wasn't. She would learn that he'd been in the wheelchair for 6 years, after an accident that he discussed with the same matter-of-fact tone he seemed to use for everything, as if making it smaller by refusing to dramatize it. She would learn that he was funny, actually funny, the dry, observational kind that crept up on you, and that he had very strong opinions about airport food and mediocre coffee, and people who said circling back in business meetings. But that was all later. For now, he just kept coming back for dinner. The first time he sat in her section and there was no event, no corporate group, just him at a table with a book he wasn't really reading, Margot almost said something about it. Almost pointed out that the book was face down in the same position it had been in 20 minutes ago and that his coffee had gone cold. Instead, she just refilled it. "Thank you," he said without looking up. "You're not reading," she said. He looked up then. "I'm thinking," he said. "About the book?" "Not really." She gave him a moment. Then, "The soup tonight is butternut squash. It tends to help with thinking." He looked at her for a second. That same unreadable expression from before, layered now with something that might have been amusement. "Is that a medical opinion?" "Professional," she said. "Not medical." He ordered the soup. That was how it started. Not with any particular gesture, but with small exchanges that accumulated without announcement. A comment about the weather that turned into a 5-minute conversation about Chicago winters. His observation that she always seemed to know when to refill something before people noticed it needed refilling, which she admitted was less talent than years of watching people avoid eye contact with empty glasses. "People don't want to ask," she said. "They feel like they're asking for too much, and you take care of it before they have to. It's a small thing." "Small things matter," he said, "usually more than the big ones." She thought about that one later, at home, while Button sat on her feet and rejected every attempt she made to move. She thought about Roland Vance and the champagne flutes, and Patrick straightening his lapel pin. She thought about the interview at the Hargrove when they'd told her she had great instincts, and how those instincts had eventually been the exact thing used against her. She thought about how Nathan Ashby had said thank you for the focaccia like he meant it, and how that small thing had lodged in her chest like a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. It was Sandra who first said anything. "He asks for your section," Sandra said one evening, with the particular neutrality of someone choosing their words carefully. "He likes the table by the window," Margot said. Said Sandra. Margot didn't say anything. "I'm not saying anything," Sandra said. "Good," said Margot, but it was noticed. And once a thing is noticed, it becomes real in a different way. Not bigger, exactly, but more solid, more undeniable. Nathan started staying later. Not conspicuously, just not rushing. He'd finish his meal and sit with his coffee, and sometimes they'd talk properly, not in the clipped professional shorthand of service and order, but in full sentences with actual direction. He'd been to a charity board meeting that afternoon, and was quietly frustrated with how much time was spent discussing the letterhead of the annual report. She'd had a phone call with her mother that had covered, in 45 minutes, approximately 0 of the things they actually needed to talk about. "Families," she agreed. "Mine thinks I work too much," he said. "Mine thinks I don't work seriously enough." He considered this. What's serious enough? A title, an office, a business card that doesn't have a hotel logo on it. "I like hotels," he said. "So do I," she said. "Turns out that's not the point." He smiled at the table. She had started to catalog his smiles. The performative one for business settings, the reflexive polite one for introductions, and this one, the quiet one, which appeared without being summoned and stayed a beat longer than the others. She did not examine too closely why she was cataloging his smiles. One evening, in the parking lot, she'd been walking to her car, he'd been heading to his, and they'd ended up talking for 20 minutes in the cold because neither of them initiated an ending. He said, "I should probably admit something." "Okay," she said. "I don't actually need to come here this often," he said. "Whitmore's is good, but I have a perfectly functional kitchen." She looked at him. "I'm aware that's obvious," he added. "A little," she said. "I'm not sure what I'm doing," he said, and the honesty of it was so unadorned that it landed somewhere between vulnerability and relief. She looked at her car keys. She looked at the sky, which was doing that thing it did in winter where it went dark purple before fully committing to black. "I'm not sure either," she said. There was a pause. "But I don't mind," she added. Nathan's mother was named Rosalind Ashby, and she was the kind of woman who entered a room and immediately understood its entire power structure. Margot met her on a Thursday evening, which was not how she'd have chosen it. Nathan had invited her to dinner, not at Whitmore & Co., at an actual restaurant, the kind of invitation that required an acknowledgement of what they were doing, which they had been carefully not providing each other with for several weeks. She had said yes. She had also spent approximately 40 minutes changing clothes, which she would not be admitting to anyone. The restaurant was warm and wood-paneled and deeply comfortable, and Margot had been there exactly 12 minutes before Rosalind Ashby walked in. She was impeccably dressed and carried herself with the straight-backed assurance of someone who had never in her life been uncertain about whether she deserved a table. She was also, clearly, not expected. "Nathan." She kissed him on the cheek. "I was in the neighborhood." "You live 20 minutes away," he said. "Close neighborhood," she said, and then turned to Margot with an expression that was perfectly gracious and completely evaluating. "Rosalind Ashby," she said, extending a hand. "Margot Solis," Margot said, and shook it. Rosalind sat down, ordered a glass of wine, and proceeded to conduct what was, structurally, an interview. She was skilled at it. The questions were wrapped in conversation. The conversation was warm and flowing, but the information gathering was systematic. Where was Margot from? What had she studied? What did her family do? Did she see herself at Whitmore's long-term, or was it transitional? Nathan intervened twice. Both times Rosalind redirected with the grace of someone who had been managing people her entire life. Margot answered honestly, because she was not interested in performing a version of herself that would not survive contact with reality. "I was fired from my last job," she said at one point, "for not responding to a guest who said something inappropriate." Brief silence. "Not responding," Rosalind said. "I chose not to acknowledge it," Margot said. "He complained to my manager. I was let go." Rosalind's expression shifted. Something moved behind it. "What hotel?" "The Hargrove." "I know the Hargrove," Rosalind said, in a tone that conveyed she knew considerably more than the name. "And I believe I know the type of man you're describing." There was a pause. "That was handled badly," Rosalind said, which was not an apology and was not warmth, but was, perhaps, the closest she came to either in a first meeting. Margot said thank you, and meant it differently than she'd expected to. The dinner ended. Rosalind left in a car that arrived exactly when she was ready. Nathan watched her go and then looked at Margot with an expression caught somewhere between apology and something softer. "I didn't know she was going to do that," he said. "I know. She loves you," Margot said. "She's trying to protect you." He was quiet for a moment. "I can protect myself," he said. "I know," she said again. "But that's not really the point of it." He looked at her. The parking lot was cold and quiet, and the purple-black sky was doing its usual thing. "You're very reasonable," he said. "I try," she said. "It gets exhausting." He laughed, the real one, low and unhurried. And somewhere in the sound of it, Margot Solis understood, without drama and without announcement, that she was in serious trouble. Roland Vance's name reappeared in her life on a Tuesday morning, which seemed unfair because Tuesdays were supposed to be neutral days. She saw the mention in a local business column, the kind of page she usually skimmed past, a note about the Hargrove Hotel's upcoming renovation announcement, and, in the context of the event's guest list, there was Roland Vance, listed as keynote. She put her phone down. She made coffee. She told herself it had nothing to do with her anymore. Then Sandra called. "I need to tell you something," Sandra said, "and I want you to hear me out before you react." "That's never a good start," Margot said. "Roland Vance's company has inquired about hosting a private event here." Margot sat down. "We receive a lot of inquiries," Sandra said carefully, "and the decision is not solely mine. But I wanted you to know before any decision was made so that it wasn't. So you heard it from me." Margot appreciated that. She said so. "What would you like to happen?" Sandra asked. This was the part that surprised her. At the Hargrove, nobody had asked her what she wanted. The math was done without her input and the answer was handed to her. "I don't want him to have something over me," Margot said slowly. "I don't want to live in a world where I have to check every corner before I walk in. But I also don't want." She stopped. "What?" "I don't want the decision to be made to protect me and then have it look like I'm the reason it was made. I don't want to be the reason a venue turns away business. That's not," she exhaled, "that's not who I am." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" "Yes, we already turned it down," Sandra said. "We had a scheduling conflict, which we did. And I wanted you to know that the conflict existed independently, and that I'm telling you now because you deserve to know, not because your presence here has made us a smaller business." Margot sat with her coffee and the quiet kitchen and Button, who had materialized from somewhere and was now sitting beside her in a way that suggested he'd been listening and had thoughts. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me," Sandra said. "Come in on time and don't let the focaccia run out and we're square," she told Nathan that evening. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, and the wanting to felt like its own kind of information. He listened the way he did everything, without interrupting, without flinching, without performing a reaction. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" he asked, honestly. Like something I didn't know was heavy just got set down. She thought about it, and also a little angry about the original thing. Still, you're allowed to be angry about it. Daphne says that too. Daphne's right, he said. Don't tell her that. She has enough evidence on that front already. He smiled. They were on his building's rooftop terrace, which turned out to be a whole situation. A proper outdoor space with covered seating and string lights, and a view of the city that did what city views at night did, which was make everything feel slightly more significant than it probably was. I want to tell you something, Nathan said. She looked at him. I've been thinking about this for a while, he said. About how to say it without it sounding like something it isn't. What is it? I spent a long time after the accident. He paused, finding the word editing myself. Not consciously. But I started to assume certain things weren't available to me. Not the obvious things. I'd made peace with most of those. He looked at the city, the quieter things, the possibility of someone who... He stopped again. Nathan, she said. Who would stay, he said. Not from obligation or pity or proving something to themselves. Just stay. She didn't say anything immediately because the moment felt like it needed to be occupied rather than filled. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. And it was so simple that she almost laughed, except it was also completely true, and that made it feel enormous and weightless at the same time. He looked at her for a long moment. The string lights did their thing. The city glittered below. Okay, he said, quietly, like setting something down. Rosalind Ashby made her second attempt at Margot on a Saturday brunch, this time with notice, and Margot suspected a revised approach. They met without Nathan. This had been Rosalind's suggestion, and to everyone's surprise, including her own, Margot had agreed. The restaurant was different from the wood-paneled dinner. This one was lighter, airier, the kind of place where the mimosas arrived in carafes, and the sunlight came in at a good angle. Rosalind was already seated when Margot arrived. She'd ordered coffee. She gestured at the chair with the ease of a woman who treated every table like it was hers. You came, Rosalind said. You asked, Margot said. Something shifted in Rosalind's expression. Not softening exactly. Rosalind Ashby's face was not filtering, but a recalibration, a recognition. My son doesn't make decisions carelessly, Rosalind said. I know, Margot said. He's also, Rosalind paused. He protects himself by being very deliberate. He doesn't often choose to be surprised. He told me about the accident, Margot said. Rosalind looked at her over the coffee cup. Did he? Not in detail, but enough. A beat no, Margot said again. Rosalind set down her cup. Outside, the Saturday street did its gentle weekend business. Joggers, dog walkers, a couple sharing one pair of earbuds, normal Saturday geometry. I want to ask you something, Rosalind said. And I want you to understand that I'm asking it because I think you'll answer honestly. Not because I think the answer is any of my business. Okay, Margot said. What do you see when you see him? Margot looked at the tablecloth. She looked at the window. She looked at Rosalind Ashby, who was watching her with an expression that had, underneath everything, the particular vulnerability of a mother trying not to be afraid. I see someone who's funny when he's not trying to be, Margot said. Who has strong opinions about bad coffee and says thank you and means it, and who is very careful about choosing to believe people. And when he does, it matters to him. She paused. I see someone I want to keep talking to. Rosalind didn't say anything for a moment. That's it, she said. What else should there be? Another pause. The mimosas arrived. Rosalind poured them both one without ceremony. He likes you very much, Rosalind said finally. Which I realize is not my information to give, but I'm giving it anyway. Margot wrapped both hands around her glass. I like him very much. Yes, Rosalind said. I can see that. She said it like a verdict, and also like a door opening. They didn't make a formal announcement. There was no moment of declaration or choreographed reveal. It was more like the thing they already were became visible. To Sandra, who smiled in a way that suggested she had opinions she was wisely keeping to herself. To Daphne, who said finally, and then immediately wanted details Margot was not prepared to provide. To Theo, who just said cool, 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 and asked if Nathan wanted more coffee, which Nathan did. Rosalind, to her credit, adapted. It was not immediate and it was not effortless. Margot did not expect it to be and would have been suspicious if it were. But she called sometimes. She asked questions that were less like interrogations and more like the particular curiosity of a woman who was genuinely trying to understand someone her son loved. At Christmas, she gave Margot a cookbook that had been in the family and inscribed it with her own name and the date, which Margot understood was a form of welcome she would need to earn and had been offered anyway. Roland Vance appeared again in her peripheral vision twice more. Once in a news piece about a lawsuit filed by 2 former Hargrove employees, and once at a restaurant across the city where she happened to be with Nathan and he happened to be leaving as they arrived. He didn't see her, or if he did, she couldn't tell, and she found, to her own moderate surprise, that she didn't particularly care either way. He had taken something from her. He had not, in the end, taken the parts that mattered. She still thought about the tray of champagne flutes sometimes, the way they had stayed level even when everything tilted. She kept thinking about that, the steadiness of it. The night the steadiness finally made sense was a rainy March evening, about 7 months after the first private dinner, when she and Nathan were in his kitchen. She was making pasta because she'd claimed the kitchen and he'd accepted this gracefully, and he said her name in a way that made her put down the wooden spoon. "What?" she said, turning. He was holding a small box. He was also looking at her with the expression she'd first seen across a dinner table on a night when she'd had no particular reason to be brave, and had been anyway. "I know the timing is," he started. "Nathan," she said. Nathan," she said again, because she could see exactly what was happening, and her heart was doing something it had never quite done before, a kind of tilting and steadying simultaneously, like a tray of champagne flutes on a night in November. "Ask me," he asked her. She said yes before the sentence fully finished. The pasta boiled over. Nobody cared. Button, who had somehow materialized from across town through mechanisms that remained unexplained, sat on the kitchen counter and watched the whole thing with the composed judgment of an animal who had always known how this ended.